There we go.
Okay, great. So
I'll start letting people in, Dory.
yeah, it'd be great. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. How's everyone doing on this frosty night? I just heard it's gonna get down to like the negative digits tonight and tomorrow. So we're finally having our winter, I guess. Right? We really haven't had much. So this is actually kind of great that we're going to get some cold weather, but always extreme here. Welcome, everyone. Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
So we're just going to take a few minutes to let people come in and get situated. And we're so happy to have everyone tonight to our February Live Lit, virtual Live Lit. So if people want to grab something to drink or a snack and settle in while everybody enters, that would be great. We have some really great readings coming up. Come some more people. So when you enter, if people could just make sure your sound is off, that would be great. And Emily, what view do people need to have in order to see the spotlighted readers? Do we just leave it on gallery?
Yeah, I think if you want to see the spotlighted readers and have them take up your whole screen, it's best to switch to speaker view.
Okay.
I think if you stay in gallery, it will only put that green box around them.
Okay, that's good to know. So yeah, if you would like to see the faces of the people who are going to be reading and speaking up close on your screen, you can switch your view the little up in the little right hand corner to speaker instead of gallery. And folks are coming in. So I'm just going to start blabbing while we allow people to come in about some of the great offerings that we have coming up at the studio or online. We are back somewhat at the studio in person now with workshops and events, but we still have a lot of things being offered virtually since it's winter, since COVID is still a thing, since some people have small babies. It's very convenient for that. So we are excited to have both kinds of offerings, both in person and virtual. And now we have the studio set up to do hybrid meetings, which has been really fun and interesting, new way of doing things. And the technology is pretty good. So
there we go. Thank you.
So tonight we are celebrating the work of people from some of our weekly workshops. We have a bunch of weekly workshops coming up at the studio and ongoing. I'm teaching several Jumpstart generative writing groups, and I also have something that's new for me this winter called the Resistant Writers Support Group, which has been really fun. And Emily Lackey, our assistant director, hi Emily, is teaching quite a few things too these days. A couple of writing from life classes. There's a memoir group in progress, and they're all renewing, I think, in March. Is that right?
Yeah, March and April.
Okay. And do you have spaces in the upcoming groups? Do you know yet?
Definitely email me if you're interested. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be some space coming available.
And we have our resident poetry person, Sarah Browning, who's just a fabulous poet and wonderful, warm instructor who's doing her regular weekly poetry group now. So that's really exciting. And she's going to continue that in March as well. I see lots of familiar faces. Hi, guys. It's nice to see you all. Wow, what a crowd. I love it. It's fantastic to see you all. I guess there's nothing better to do on a freezing Thursday night. It's gonna be 1 degree outside than come and hear some great writing. So, so welcome. We'll give people another couple of minutes to arrive before we officially start the reading. But what are you all going to do to survive the cold? You can unmute yourself if you want to chime in.
Stay indoors.
Stay in,
I agree.
Stay in bed.
stay in bed, I know. Yeah, David, my husband David is a school teacher. I don't see him here yet, but he's coming. But he just found out that school is canceled in Springfield tomorrow because it's going to be so cold.
Wow.
Yeah, and they haven't canceled yet for anything this year. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how freezing it's going to be. So don't go anywhere tomorrow if you can help it. Snuggle in.
Wow.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, we are writers in progress. I'm sure most of you do know, but if anyone here doesn't know what we do, we are a writing studio in Florence, Mass. That's where our physical studio is located. And at the Arts and Industry Building in Florence, we have a gorgeous studio for those of you who haven't been. And we started there, I don't know, a dozen or more years ago, offering workshops and weekly workshops and one-day craft capsules and support groups. And the studio has just grown, and we now have about 10 or 12 instructors, every different writers from the area and from all around now, really every season, offering weekly workshops and half-day workshops and one-day workshops on all sorts of craft topics around writing, as well as topics about the process of writing, about confidence, about how do you generate work, where do you get inspiration. So we like to think that we address all of that stuff, the craft, the confidence, the community, and the creativity, all the C words and all the good C words. And we just are really excited to have such a huge, diverse group of regional authors now teaching. And the great thing about Zoom is that it's allowed us to have writers from all over the world, really, which was an added benefit, a silver lining of the pandemic. And so now we've kind of come back to the studio, but we're still doing stuff online, and we still have writers who join us weekly from places like Philadelphia, California, Baltimore, Vancouver. We don't have anyone from across the Atlantic yet, but I'm hoping that might happen. It would be really exciting.
Atlanta.
Thank you. North Carolina.
Guatemala.
Guatemala. I forgot we had someone from Guatemala. Thank you. Yeah, it's great. I mean, this was a really unexpected, fabulous perk of COVID for us. And it's just expanded our writing community in wonderful ways. And tonight we're going to be celebrating the work of 4 writers who are from the Tuesday morning and the Friday morning Jumpstart, which is a weekly generative group that I lead. And you're going to be in for a treat hearing some short pieces from these 4 writers. We have Kate Hartford, Sandy Gold, JoAnne Jones, and Elizabeth Falkner will be reading in that order. I'll introduce each one shortly before they read. And But before we do that, I just wanted to share a couple of quotes with you that kind of answer a question about, someone just asked me before we opened the group up, why do you do this story? It seems like so much extra work. And, I think what I said is just that there's so much amazing, rich, fantastic, inspiring writing that happens in these groups, in these one-day groups, in these weekly groups. It almost seems a criminal thing not to share it with a wider audience, because every week there's just like an embarrassment of riches coming out of these groups, right? Those of you who are in them, I'm not exaggerating. It's just an amazing thing that happens when people get together and share their work and share their stories. It's fabulous. So I love the chance to celebrate some of that work with a wider audience, and also to give writers the experience and the opportunity to practice sharing their work aloud, to have an occasion to do that, to have an occasion to work on something and polish it up. It's sort of a completion of the process, I think, because, we write in isolation sometimes, but really writing is a community response. It's a communal act. And here's a couple of quotes that kind of capture that. This is from JoAnne Didion. She says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live. We look for the sermon in the suicide, for the social or moral lesson in the murder of 5. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of the multiple choices. We live entirely, especially if we are writers, by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images, by the ideas with which we have learned to freeze the shifting phantasmagoria, which is our actual experience." And then Philip Pullman says, "After nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world." So there you have it. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the reading. And each writer is going to read for about 7 or 8 minutes. At the end of the reading, we will have a question and answer period if the audience has questions that they want to ask the writers about their process, about the work that they hear tonight, about anything, or if you want to ask Emily or I questions about the workshops and what we do and the community we have here, you're welcome to do that too. So if you have questions that come up throughout these readings, feel free to type them into the chat bar. And at the end, we'll go through and select some of those and just have a short conversation with our writers who are presenting tonight. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start with a piece by Kate Hartford. Kate won a National Playwriting Award at a tender age, but detoured into serial careers in scientific research, university teaching, and grant making. 9 years ago, after long residence in China, she returned to Western Massachusetts to write, garden, and finally surrender to yoga. She blogs rather inconstantly at inconstantgardener.com. It's a great blog if you haven't checked it out. And she's working on a series of essays about growing up in a large Irish Catholic family that she thought was a fairly normal family until she started writing about it. She learned her gallows humor at her mother's knee. And I'm so happy to welcome Kate.
Thanks, Dory. And thanks to all these folks who turned out tonight. It's really great to see all these friendly faces. I hope you're looking forward as much as I am to hearing Sandy and JoAnne and Elizabeth read. For my reading, I've chosen a short excerpt from a longer essay about growing up very Catholic in mid-century America. I call this part, "Heaven Can't Wait." My great aunt Bertha is making one of her rare and terrifying visits to our family. All powder, pearls, and mink stole, she leans down to 4-year-old me, pinches my cheek hard, and demands, "And what do you want to be when you grow up, honey?" Casting my eyes skyward through her to the heavens, I pipe, "I don't want to grow up. I want to die and go to heaven and be with God." They got to me that young. By age 4, my do or die quest for heaven was already underway. By age 7, things got more complicated. I'd reached the age of reason, which meant I could sin and miss my crack at paradise. So I hatched a concrete plan. The nuns assured us that martyrs bypass purgatory and shoot straight up to heaven. I caught snippets of radio news about missionaries murdered by Mau Mau guerrillas in Kenya. My risk-averse streak activated, and I devised a 4-step foolproof path to eternal bliss. Become a missionary nun, go to Kenya, be dispatched by Mau Mau, knock on pearly gates. By age 10 or 11, I got more realistic and studied our lives of the saints for models of martyrdom. Saints Agatha, Agnes, Cecilia, and Lucia all charmed me, but they were long ago and needed Roman emperors to do the trick. The life of 20th century Saint Maria Goretti, however, enthralled me. Maria, a devout Italian farm girl, was stabbed to death at age 12 by the randy teenage son of the family with whom she and her parents shared their hovel. She'd resisted when he tried to do something to her I didn't quite understand. She had made a vow of virginity, so I did likewise. I had yet to divine what virginity was, but if it was good enough for Maria, it was good enough for me. Besides, I knew from studying the lives of the saints that while guys had many roads to that certified occupancy of heaven called sainthood, gals had narrower options. And among women, virgins had by far the best statistical chance of becoming saints. Widows trailed a distant second, but what's the percentage in marrying in hopes hubby will die before you? He might outlast you and you'd be shit out of luck. So I opted for nunhood. Nuns were, by definition, virgins. Hell, they were uber virgins, and they had such power. They could terrorize an entire class with a long division problem or a compound complex sentence for diagramming. They could coerce the rowdies with a sharp knuckle rap on the head. Boys were favored targets, and I loved seeing them put in their place. Oh, I so wanted to get me to a nunnery. I looked up in the lives the saints who founded the nunly orders and followed up on them in our Encyclopedia Britannica. Every Sunday after Mass, I eagerly snatched up Our Sunday Visitor in the church vestibule and devoured the section advertising the various orders of nuns, Augustinian all the way to Ursuline. Bad news? Most orders wouldn't take me till age 18, an eternity away. Every Sunday, I calculated the years and months and weeks remaining before I could enlist. Had there been an internet in those days, I'd have been haunting nun chat rooms. In the meantime, though, I needed to avoid sin because sin is the devil if you want to get to heaven. And sins were everywhere and hard to avoid. To help manage them, the church divided them into venial, peccadillos that send you to purgatory, and mortal, peccamagillas that send you straight to hell. Now, a rational observer might wonder what a child could possibly do that would pitch her into hell. My concern, though, centered more on purgatory. I was damned if I wanted to postpone paradise for a couple of millennia while I worked off whatever peccadillos stained my soul when it staled off this earthly sphere. And those could be just about anything because sin was everywhere. As Sister Mary Saint's name assured us, even something as innocuous as kissing became a sin the instant you started to enjoy it and kept going. And you could never be too careful. We had to avoid not only sin, which you could commit even by omission, but also occasions of sin, Any situation that might make it too easy for you to segue into sin. The sisters and Father N warned us of those perils. Father N delivered guidance in his Sunday sermons. Usually those were as dry as a day-old donut, but a couple times a year, he enlivened them with a roar that could have brought down the walls of Jericho, decrying the dangers that loom when children reach the age of puberty. I had no idea what that was, but it sure sounded like something I should avoid. Clearly an occasion of sin. The sisters got just a smidgen more specific. One spring day in 7th grade, while the birds and the bees were doing their thing outside, Sister Mary Saint's name released the boys to the school playground with their balls and bats. We girls remained perched sedately at our wooden desks, sun streaming seductively through the mile-high windows, while Sister spun us an hour-long homily. The boys are at a dangerous time in their development, Sister warned, her chain of giant wooden rosary beads rattling as she swept an arm to include all of us. And you girls need to be extra careful, to be modest. Make sure that you never do anything that could excite a boy into having impure thoughts, because that would put his immortal soul in jeopardy. This wasn't the patent leather shoes reflect your underwear speech that you may have heard rumored. No, she was vaguer than that. She rambled and euphemized us into a stupor. But the core message was that I could somehow, by word or deed or dress or manner, somehow, merely by my plump and pimply girl presence, cause a boy to be cast into eternal hellfire. I hadn't yet gotten a training bra, let alone my period. I glanced nervously at my sophisticated friend Jeannie 2 rows over. She had just graduated to braces on her teeth and often amused us by shooting the teeny rubber bands off the retainers with her tongue. Her aim was pretty darn good. But what I'm saying is, we were not yet quite in femme fatale territory. I grasped the main point, though. We girls were now ticking sin bombs, walking occasions of sin. We could blow any boy off the path to heaven just by unbuttoning our chaste white cotton blouses by one button too many, or switching our hips as we sashayed down the school corridor in our polished penny loafers. I did relish the fantasy. Don't ask how I reconciled it with my nunly goals, that I might somehow tempt a certain Freddie, who ranged through the hallways of St. Ives like a tawny young lion. But at the same time, I trembled at the thought that I might send some hapless boy to hell without knowing it, or even him. This spelled a heavy responsibility, and I was not ready for it. Then came puberty, and I started to enjoy it and kept going, but that's another story. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Kate. Oh my gosh. Walking sin bombs. What a delight. I think we all need a copy of that one. Thank you, Kate. So next up, for something totally different, and all of these readings are so different and so wonderful. It's quite a variety of tones we have here. But the next reader we have is Sandy Gold. Sandy has been a lifelong journaler and writer. However, she says she's rarely shared her work with anyone before joining Writers in Progress and my Friday morning writing group, my Jumpstart group on Fridays, which she was a member of for a couple of years, and we miss her in that group terribly. So I'm happy to have you here tonight, Sandy. Welcome.
Thank you, Dory. The piece that I'm going to read is One piece from a longer project I started working on. Right after my mom passed away, I turned towards writing as a way to process everything I was going through. And the project is divided up into the 5 stages of grief. And I'm going to read one section from depression. Depression, feelings of severe despondency and dejection. My doctor had told me for a couple of years that I seemed dull, weighed down with worry, a little depressed. At my last checkup, I had been feeling really down, and so I had finally agreed to go on a low dose of an antidepressant. At first, it made me sleepy, lethargic. I almost stopped without giving it a real chance. I had to experiment a little with finding the right time of day to take the little blue pill, but when I found the right time of day and the right dose, things did seem easier. The same worries that were weighing me down were still there and still very real, but I could think more clearly. I was able to manage my emotions more easily. That edge I had been holding on to softened. Until December 23rd, 2019. That little blue pill just couldn't compete with the sadness, the gutted feeling of loss that permeated my entire being. Hi, Mom. I didn't ask anyone else if they wanted the silver. We had been being so respectful, solicitous with each other, making no assumptions as to who had claims on anything. We asked permission, we asked again, double-checking that someone else didn't have an emotional connection to some object that needed to be honored. But I didn't ask about the silver. I just decided it was mine. I didn't even know you had the silver. It was hidden away in a drawer, each setting wrapped in a felt pouch. Ornate, not really my taste. There were serving pieces and a carving set, and the knife had your grandfather's initials on the handle. I already had 8 place settings, wrapped in floral cloth napkins, living in a cardboard box in the hutch in my dining room back home. I never used them. They're not my style, and there weren't enough settings to go around when I hosted holidays. I've had those 8 settings for a long time. You gave them to me shortly after Grandma died. I always thought that the other settings went to a cousin and his wife. I remember thinking it was a shame that you and Aunt Frances decided to split up the set. While I understand that you both wanted it to go to the next generation, splitting it up meant it wasn't useful anymore. Neither of us had enough of the good silverware to actually use it. So when I found the silver tucked away in a drawer, I didn't ask anyone. I just took the pouches of silver place settings and started planning for how I'd bring them home. They were heavy, and with everything else I was desperate to take home, I knew I'd be nearing my weight limit in my suitcase. And what if my suitcase got lost? Lost luggage had happened before. So I decided to take an extra suitcase just for the silverware and carry it on the plane. Then it would be with me and never out of my sight. It seemed like the smartest way to get it back up to Boston. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if this was the smartest plan. I wasn't sure I'd actually be allowed to carry it onto the plane. Security scans and knives. I was pretty sure the scanner at the airport would be able to see through the felt pouches. What if they took them from me at security and then I'd lost them forever? So instead, I took all the knives out, wrapped them separately, put them in my big suitcase snuggled in the midst of all my clothes. My brother dropped me at the airport early. He still had a 3-hour drive home, and I told him not to worry. I'd grab something to eat while I waited. The airport was crowded, and I was lugging around the extra carry-on with all the silverware, as well as my oversized tote that I had come down to Florida with. I felt burdened. So when they asked for people to gate check their carry-ons because the plane was crowded, I volunteered. I'd get rid of that heavy bag and not have to pay for it. It was a win-win. So I handed over my deceptively heavy carry-on suitcase. I took the hot pink gate check tag in return, and I settled down to wait for my flight. It wasn't until I was on board and seated that I remembered. I didn't carry on the extra suitcase because of the cost of checking a bag. I carried it on because I was afraid it might get lost or stolen. I was carrying it on to keep it safe, and now I had just handed it over and it was out of my sight. My brain fog was real. I spent the 3 hours of that flight playing the what if game in my head. What if I never saw the suitcase again? What if the carry-on suitcase came off the plane in Boston, but my checked bag didn't? Could I use the silverware without the knives? Or what if I ended up with just the knives? I spent all of that time worrying for nothing. Both bags were waiting for me in Boston, going round and round on the baggage carousel when we landed. Back home, I was eager to unpack. I took the knives out from their hiding places and spread them on the dining room table, reuniting each knife with the rest of its place setting. Then I pulled out the shoebox with the silver I already had, ready to count how many complete sets I now owned. I was already visualizing using them on Passover as a way to remember family members no longer with us who wouldn't be sitting around the table. I unwrapped one setting and stared at it. Then I unwrapped another and another just in case I was mistaken. But no, the settings I already had were not the same ones as the settings I just lugged home. They didn't match at all. Not the size, not the pattern, not the shape. Oh, Mom, whose silver did I already have? And now whose silver were these new sets? Which side of the family were each from? And are there still more place settings out there with the cousin and his wife? How will we ever find out whose they are? There's no one left to ask. Thanks to COVID, I never did get to have that Passover holiday with family that year. But someday I probably will go back to hosting large family holidays. Will anyone care that the silver doesn't match? Will they even notice? And will I have to explain to my brothers where the extra silver came from?
Thank you, Sandy. It's a terrific piece. Wow, so many great metaphors in that piece. Okay, so moving along, our next reader for something again totally different is JoAnne Jones. JoAnne is bi-coastal. She divides her time between Northampton and Santa Cruz, California, lucky woman, along with her wife Debbie and hound Rosie. After retiring from full-time employment, she discovered the joys and the power of writing. Am I allowed to say that you're also an author?
Yes.
She's also the author of the book Headstrong, a fabulous memoir that everyone should check out. So welcome, JoAnne.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dory. And thank you all for being here to listen to us. And I'm so honored to be part of this group and part of Dory's program. As Dory mentioned, I published my first book at the age of 73, my first post-academic book at the age of 73, the memoir Headstrong. And what I'm going to read from now is a work in progress. It's a novel called Espresso Murder. Pretty different. So before I begin, I want to mention that a major theme in this book is domestic violence, and there is a scene that I'll be reading that contains some sexual abuse. So, Espresso Murder. Prologue. A martini, extra dry, please, Liz says, pulling her skirt down to find a comfortable position on the bar stool. Yes, ma'am. A twist? No, thanks. The bartender puts a martini in front of her. On the napkin, large, bold script proclaims JFK Lounge. Liz looks at her watch. She has carefully planned every detail, from the coordinated travel clothing to the leather satchel with an engraved folio for her passport and travel documents. There would be, she reassured herself, no mistakes. She checks the time and imagines his eyes looking at the clock in their kitchen. It's 7:30 a.m. his time. He'll be wearing the same t-shirt he slept in, still smelling of an evening of booze, tobacco, and women. He'll leave the house in a half an hour to open the store. After downing espresso, he'll change into a suit and tie. He thinks that makes him look respectable. Maybe that's how some people see him. Good old Tommy, high school football hero, business owner. He's too stupid to realize that everyone at work knows about his drinking. The stench couldn't be showered away. Even espresso couldn't clear his eyes, head, or red eyes. He never ate breakfast, but needed, he said, 2 cups of espresso to wake up and get rolling. About now, he'll notice I'm not there. Liv, where the fuck are you? Where's my espresso? He'll bellow. As the minutes pass without a response, he'll get anxious about time. Then he'll pick up the espresso pot and see that it's full. He'll pour coffee into his cup, put it in the microwave, and set the timer for 30 seconds. The goddamn microwave ruins the taste, he said more times than I could count. He'll stand next to the microwave, sipping espresso, angry that he's had to exert any effort. In a few seconds, he'll get dizzy and reach for the counter to steady himself. He won't have time to call for help. Another? Surprised by the sound of a voice, Liz stammers, no, just the check. Announcement. SAS Flight 942, nonstop to Arlanda, will board in 30 minutes. She puts a US $100 bill on the bar. Chapter 1, Redding, California. Olivia Marie Leary. On my first day of 10th grade, I found out that Mrs. Stevens, my advisor, had registered me in home economics instead of the chemistry class I wanted. I can still see her drab gray blouse, loose-fitting black skirt, and pinched face as I marched into her office, tears welling up. I asked for advanced chemistry. I wrote it on the course selection sheet. I plan to go to college to be a doctor. Well, Olivia, a young lady needs real skills. Anyway, home economics is like chemistry for girls. You'll see. You'll thank me someday. I can't explain this, but something in me changed when I couldn't take advanced chemistry. I didn't daydream anymore. I stopped watching reruns of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. I didn't complain to Mama anymore about chores. After school, I'd get a hot dog and Coke and go with my best friend Marie to watch the football team practice. Hey, Olivia, Tommy Allen shouted one day. You're looking fine. Well, thanks, Tommy. He was the quarterback of the football team. So handsome, face flushed from a long afternoon practice session. As he walked towards me, I could feel my face getting hot. Say, Liv, my pop sometimes lets me drive his car at night. Want to go to a movie sometime? Really? Me? I'm not sure my parents will let me. Oh, you're smart enough to make something up. I thought I was going to faint. All the girls had a crush on him. What would I wear? What would I say? Why would he want to go out with me? I'd known Tommy for a long time. I used to go to Allen's Plumbing with Daddy. Tom was usually there, trying to look like he was working and following his father around like a puppy, intent on pleasing. Daddy and Mr. Allen would talk, and then Mr. Allen would shout, "Boy, get a bushing and flange for Mr. O'Leary." Pretty soon we were going steady. He gave me his football jacket. When I started senior year, he asked me to marry him. I want to sleep and wake up with you every day for the rest of my life. You're my best friend, my best fan. You have lots of time for college. You're everything I want and need. Please say yes, he said, pulling me close to him and kissing me gently on the lips. Please, Liv. We got married 2 months after graduation. Mama made me a long-sleeved white dress with an empire waist. She stitched flowers into the skirt and attached the veil to a headband with the same kind of flowers. It was simple and plain. We fell into a routine. Tommy worked at his father's store, and I took care of us. Sometimes I thought about my dream of going to college, but Tommy said school could wait until we had more money, and then he said we had to start a family first. I remember the first time Tommy really scared me. I was finishing the cleanup from a barbecue and giddy from beer. For once, I wanted to have sex. Even though we'd been married for a few years, I rarely initiated sex. Tommy was scraping off the grill. I put my arms around him and lowered my hand. He turned around. What the fuck are you doing? I'm in the mood. Let's go inside. We can finish cleaning tomorrow. Oh, you're in the mood, huh? The mood to what? Not have a baby? It takes time, Tom. I said, taking a few steps away from him. If you're so eager, let's do it right now, right here. We can't have sex here. The neighbors will see us. He shouted, we're going to make a baby now. Y'all want to watch? He pulled me toward him. I was wearing a sundress. He pushed me down, pulled off my panties, put his knee on my stomach. Scream, yeah, scream, that's even better. Scream, everyone will think I'm a real stud. Scream, bitch. When he finished, he got off me and went back to scrubbing the grill. Months passed. We didn't have another scene. He didn't yell at me. I started to relax. I thought maybe he'd been upset because we didn't have much money. Maybe ashamed he didn't earn as much as some of his friends. Or maybe troubled that he worked for his father, who always bossed him around. I tried harder to make dinners he liked and keep the house looking good. I made sure there was always cold beer in the fridge and was careful not to ask him too many questions. I didn't enjoy sex, but pretended I did. That's it.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, JoAnne. Wow. That was intense and gripping. I have so many questions, but we'll wait till the end to ask them. Thank you for that powerful reading. So yeah, the theme of variety tonight, and now we have some writing about chocolate to end this wonderful reading. Elizabeth Falkner is up next. She is a recent addition and very welcome and wonderful addition to my Tuesday morning jumpstart. Elizabeth is a professional chef. She's an award-winning professional chef who started cooking and then owning restaurants in San Francisco for 2 decades. She moved across the country to open restaurants in New York and cooks both savory and sweet. She loves cooking competitions and has competed and judged on many shows on Food Network, Bravo, and others. Chef Falkner is a fitness advocate and loves playing sports and staying fit to cook. An author of 2 cookbooks, spoken and taught classes all over the world, and on the board of trustees of the James Beard Foundation. In 2022, she completed a documentary called Sorry We're Closed, which is currently close to distribution. And are we hearing from your food memoir tonight, or is this a separate piece, Elizabeth?
Well, I don't know yet, because I don't know if this is going to be in the memoir, but I love to write about food, and I take classes from Emily and Dory, just starting last year. And I always tell people to get a little snack or not be here hungry, because I often write about food. Or these guys will tell you not to show up hungry. All right, this is a piece about chocolate. How do I tell you about chocolate? I have always had a complex relationship with chocolate. Chocolate is a polymorphic complex structure of about 400 identified chemical compounds, and dark or bitter chocolate is high in flavonoids. This means it's quite versatile and can pair with many flavors, even with things like anchovy or wasabi. My relationship with chocolate is a little more BD than SM in bondage discipline sadomasochism. I was born allergic to it, but allergies can be deceptive. Whatever was called chocolate back then probably was morphed from cocoa beans that had been through quite an incursion from their original state. In other words, what I was after early on was more in the world of Snickers or Hershey's syrup. I would climb up to the top of the refrigerator to a cupboard to find my mom's stash of Toll House chocolate chips or even Ovaltine, and I would eat as much as I could, knowing I would be in trouble for it later. So it was all or nothing. Those products were loaded with sugar. This was the beginning of America's overprocessing and spraying of pesticides on all the crops. So candy and other snacks with distant expiration dates were most likely, definitely, filled with toxins. The actual amount of chocolate would have been so minimal, it's unlikely that cacao was causing my allergic reaction. Nevertheless, when I was 9 years old, I went to school one morning and declared that I would no longer be allergic to this stuff. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was my favorite book at that time, and I really wanted to find or make that chocolate river and waterfall someday. I somehow willed my alleged allergy away. I bought a chocolate milk with my lunch money and I was fine. And again, there really isn't much cacao content in chocolate milk. As a teenager, to prove that chocolate and I were meant to be together, I began to develop this idea that I was a good baker, a really good baker. I made my parents' anniversary cakes at least a couple times, and after the success of Mrs. Fields, I remember thinking I could probably make better cookies than her. When David's Cookies and Famous Amos Cookies were new cookie shops, I appointed myself as the judge of those very different cookies. There was a buttery crisp flavor I liked in Famous Amos Cookies, and the David's cookies were made from melted or almost melted butter because they were almost like a tuile cookie with a chunk of Lindt chocolate in the center. They were a little greasy, but stood out because they were unique. I became obsessed with the short list of ingredients in the recipes, and I was determined to understand what made the difference in a finished cookie. What brand of chocolate or other ingredients were used? I tried a few techniques of mixing the ingredients, and since brown sugar tastes better, why wouldn't I want more of that in my recipe? 1 cup of butter softened. What temperature is softened? When adding eggs, how much mixing is too much? I tasted all the chocolates available at the time. They all tasted different. There were Guittard and Ghirardelli chips available in the grocery stores back then. And then there were Lindt and Baker's brand dark chocolate bar options. I also had to feel the mood of the batter each time. I wrote my recipe down, but would tweak it just a little more, of this and that, depending on the weather or the brand of flour or butter. I would look to see if the chocolate melted or held its shape after baking. And with all these little nuances, I was realizing that food is actually alive and noticing that alchemy mixes with artistry and a little magic each time we cook or bake something. While still in college, I worked in a couple of retail shops, both in Southern and Northern California, that carried fancy chocolate products, and started to build a repertoire of other chocolate recipes which included chocolate souffle, a death by chocolate tart, and fudgy praline pecan brownies. Shortly after college, I started cooking professionally at a French bistro called Café Claude in San Francisco, where we used giant 20-pound 4-inch slab bars of Callebaut Belgian chocolate for our chocolate mousse. That chocolate was stiff. I had to change the recipe because we had to temper some hot water and cream into it to fold in the whipped cream and egg whites so it wouldn't seize up and form little chips of cocoa mass in the mousse. In my first official pastry chef role, I was allowed to use Valrhona chocolate from Tain le Hermitage in France. Valrhona was a revolutionary chocolate for the pastry business. In the early 1990s, they started distributing to chefs, and it was like going from rental skis to slalom racing skis. It tempered so smoothly. They produced several dark couvertures from different regions or blends of beans from a region, and wow, they really stood out. The Manjari couverture was my favorite, as it had notes of dried cherry, anise seed, and cassis. It had beans from Venezuela. My relationship with chocolate deepened when El Rey, a brand of chocolate made in Venezuela, invited me and a handful of other chefs to visit the farms and factory in that country. We spent a week and a half studying the trees, the fermentation, the drying and roasting of cocoa beans, and how the beans were milled and conched into couverture or chocolate bars. It was Venezuela where I fell in love with just the nibs. We would taste the roasted bean varietals, which crumble into nibs, and then taste those ground with sugar into rustic lab bars. We also tasted all the flavors of Venezuelan culture around us and got to use their chocolates in an over-the-top tasting menu we chefs made on our final evening in Caracas. For my course, I chose to make buttery giant mangoes sliced on a meat slicer to cover the bottom of each plate, like mango carpaccio. I served this with a shaving of very dark sugar called papelón over, a squeeze of lime, some dried chili, sea salt, and cocoa nibs on top. Chocolate is one of the most sculptural foods there is. In my San Francisco restaurant and patisserie Citizen Cake, I mastered the tempering of chocolate and made huge arcs and angles and spikes of chocolate jutting out of the cakes we made. I built modern cakes and chocolate bonbons and came to understand that cake making and chocolate making and eating is more about architecture than sugar bombing. During that time, someone asked me to build a cake on a woman's nude body, but the cake and mousse kept sliding off her, and she got cold from laying there getting covered in ganache. I learned that, of course, her body temperature was too warm to hold the mousse and cake. This is because chocolate actually melts in our mouth at our body temperature. I would later paint models in chocolate from my patisserie and restaurant opening parties. I now knew that the warm chocolate would stay sexy, shiny, and melted on their body parts. The body parts that weren't already covered in latex hot pants or bustiers and garter belts. One time I was collaborating with another chef on a menu and was told to make the panna cotta for dessert. I didn't like that idea so much. We use the term palate cleanser in fine dining, but I wanted a palate wipeout. I needed to make a dessert that both annihilated what came before it and simultaneously surprised and pleased the guests beyond belief. So I made pineapple braised with seductive Sichuan spices like hot chili, star anise, cinnamon, clove, black pepper, cubeb, and Sichuan peppercorns, and pureed that all together with lime juice and chilled it. This was followed by a Scharfenberger bittersweet chocolate sous vide cake, microwaved, fluffy, and rich with a cleavage of hazelnut praline and crunchy nibs with turbinado sugar, smoked Malden salt, and tonka bean gelato with a garnish of kumquats and juniper syrup. It worked. The host of the dinner told the group she needed a cigarette after my dessert. I learned how powerful chocolate can be and that I could make sweeping gestures with my food making. And now, when I want to build a menu or a dessert course that includes chocolate, I want to take you somewhere you haven't been before. What would a black hole taste like? It most definitely would have chocolate. It would sound like David Bowie's last album. I would make that dark chocolate sous vide cake with a cassis and absinthe gel and a cocoa and cocoa nib streusel with hints of black olive and leather. Chocolate is fun to flirt with, and that's good enough for most people. This relationship I have with chocolate has taken me to familiar and otherworldly recipes and places. I've pushed boundaries and been to a few edges with it. My recommendation is choose chocolate as your safe word.
Wow. I think everyone is like in a little puddle on the floor right now.
Awesome.
Or else they're running to their kitchens to see if they have anything that even comes close to approximating any of those ingredients. It was so amazing, Elizabeth. Thank you. Oh, wow. Sexy writing. So I do have a few questions here from people. So let's have a little, I know, right? Jeannie says she needs a cigarette and a martini. I need a big glass of red wine to go with all that chocolate. Oh, wow. Okay. So all really different writers, really different tones, subject matters, and pieces. If anybody wants to, type in their questions at this point, you can, and I'll just start with the ones that we had in the chat. So, here's one from me to you, Kate. Do you have to work at being so funny, or does that just happen for you? Does that just the voice that you write in and it comes naturally? Or are you conscious of, okay, I've got to be funnier?
It just happens. I mean, like I said in my bio, I learned gallows humor at my mother's knee. And my mother and my grandmother and my aunts, when they got together, were just amazing. So I think it's a way of looking at the world that, I think when people are writing, they're framing the world in a way they may not even be conscious of. And for me, I think the frame is usually the absurdity of any situation that I observe. And when you're writing about absurdity, you can't help but make it funny, I guess. But I think if I ever tried, I'd probably ruin it.
You'd probably ruin it. So like, you don't have any tips for the rest of us who don't write funny?
Be born in an Irish Catholic family.
There you go.
But it has its downsides.
Well, it's just really fabulous. So thank you. And JoAnne, your subject matter is so intense, and I think people are curious to know sort of what that's like, you know, to write a murder story and to write about such traumatic events. Do you find yourself kind of getting emotionally upset when you write this, or are you able to just focus on the craft and distance yourself from what's going on?
No, I'm not able to just focus on the craft, because I've never done anything like this. I started, I was in a writing group, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, maybe longer. And I wrote a few pages in response to a prompt, and it contained this idea. And this character never left me. The sort of the nub of the story never left, and this character just stayed with me. And the more I learned about domestic violence, I was also the victim of a violent act, and the more my consciousness about the lives of women got, I don't know if it's sharper or angrier or spikier or something, I'm just kind of consumed with this. And I don't, sounds funny, I don't think of this as murder, as in murder. I think of it as the conundrum of what a person does to survive. What do you do when it's your life that's being halted by somebody else in all ways that I think for many victims of abuse, it's not only the fear of being killed, it's that there's no life. There's nothing. Their lives are completely trapped. And so I am completely taken in by these characters, and they talk to me. And so now I kind of have it fleshed out about where I'm going with it. But the starts and stops have been partly because it wasn't clear where they were going.
I love that idea that it's not really about murder when it's your own life at stake. It really is self-defense and survival. Did you have to do a lot of research to find ways to kill him off? I'm really curious. And then did you have to like erase your Google searches so that no one would suspect you?
I have erased my Google searches, but I can't give away any information. It was a family member that gave me some insight, but I can't divulge that. But I have gotten like a little preoccupied with what I'm Google searching, including where can you go in the world where there's no extradition. And I've learned a great deal about undercover networks, underground networks of getting new identification and all kinds of things. I have done a lot of research on the particulars of it and what happens to women who do in fact kill their abuser. And in the story that I'm telling, this character would not be able to claim, the abused woman syndrome because she planned it. And so it's, I'm into the complications of what it is and how we deal with it. And I feel like I'm taking up a little too much time talking, but the other thing about women who are abused is that there is no community. There are so many levels of being enclosed, and one of them is the secret of what's happening to them. So, I mean, there are now some groups and there are things, but so many women are just so completely isolated and ashamed and terrified. And so that's what I think about. And I'm sorry Tommy was killed in the process.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I am, but Yeah, it sounds like fascinating and completely absorbing research. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sandy, I have a question for you, which is, I've heard a lot of people say that, and my parents are still living, but I've heard a lot of people say that these relationships that we have with our departed loved ones continue to evolve and grow after they die. And I just wonder if that's been true for you in the process of writing this book about your mother and writing these letters to her, if you feel that it's kind of kept the relationship alive and growing in some way.
I think for me, definitely. I started writing these letters because I didn't know what else to do. I used to talk to my mother every day, usually in the car coming home from work. And there was this void, and talking to myself just wasn't doing it. So I started the letters first as a way just to get through each day. And then they started to evolve. And so many of the letters came from prompts, Dory, that you gave us. I had not thought about how did I end up with 20 place settings of mismatched silver until you gave us a prompt one Friday morning. And it said something about silverware. And so it's been a nice way. I don't know if I would think about it as the relationship, but it's been a way for me to keep the memories going. There were a lot of memories that I would have lost if I hadn't gone through this process of coming up with these random letters to my mom based on strange prompts.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Sandy. It's funny, isn't it, how a prompt about something seemingly random and small can, be sort of like a hook to something much larger. Like snagging a fish. I think Roberta, I can't remember the author who said it was like fishing. Writing was like fishing, and you snag something that you think is small, and then you pull it up and it turns out to be much larger. Elizabeth, sexiest writing about food I've ever heard in my life. I'm curious about whether the process of cooking and the process of writing have any parallels. Like, have you noticed any similarities in the creative process around these two activities, or are they just completely different and take you away from the other?
No, I think that they're both different forms of storytelling. I think that especially in my fine dining years, we learn to take people from an amuse-bouche to, maybe 5 to, 24 courses in some cases, and that you have to keep people, you have to edit and you have to keep people connected along an entire evening of dining like that. So it's very much storytelling, not just the waiter telling you where everything's coming from or the chef telling you. But I find so many parallels in routines and discipline and everything with cooking as I do learning this craft of writing. And I also want to tell my stories of cooking and try to, blur the lines between the actual cooking and writing.
I think you're doing that, and I think part of what makes it so rich and so vivid and alive is just the language that you use, and some of it's just about specificity, naming, what was it, olive and leather?
Hence, well, in relationship to the story, but it's true. And I actually have wanted to do that in my food making. So I have had to find like different essential oils that are, food grade, and whether people know it or not, this does happen in candy making a lot too. And I've done a lot in that world of coming up with other notes that just help accentuate flavors. So it's similar in finding the right words too.
Yeah, it really struck me that both cooking and writing depend on incredible specificity, right? Choosing this thing over that and naming it, being able to name this thing over that. So that was really interesting for me to suddenly realize as you were reading it. Thank you for that. So we'll let people go so they can go eat something. Although nothing in anyone's fridge is going to compare to anything that you described in that piece. This is how it is every Tuesday morning for me. It's like I get out of that class and I'm like, oh God, I don't have any good food. So fabulous readings, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of this community, for sharing your powerful stories, and for being here tonight. And thank you so much, audience community members, for showing up and supporting these writers and being part of our community. If you want to know more about the workshops that we have coming up, you can go to writersinprogress.com. We will be updating our workshop offerings probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks to include the spring lineup, and we're gonna have a lot of great stuff on there, so check it out. And thanks everyone so much. This was really fun.
Thank you, Dory.
Bye, everyone. Good seeing you all.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all. Good writing, good
Everyone.
reading. Appreciate it.
Survive the cold, those of you on the East Coast this weekend.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Go
Thank you.
outside.